This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Glynn Tonsor, K-State livestock economist, begins today's show with a cattle market update. He explains movements in the market, higher daily price limits, and his new meat demand monitor report. Continuing the show is K-State Extension entomologist Anthony Zukoff with information on corn rootworm and corn earworm and how the pests can impact the corn crop. Another segment of Faces in Agriculture in today's show. Laura Haffner from Ellis County talks about the labor challenges her operation has faced and what she has done to help others to see its impact. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Monday show with a cattle market update. And this week we're joined by K-State livestock economist Glynn Tonsor. Glynn, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Glynn, starting our cattle market conversation with what are cash cattle markets looking like?
Yeah, more or less flat, a little bit off this past week. When we look at the fed cattle market, USDA AMS called the 5-area price on Friday at $187. That's basically flat for the week. When we look over at feeder cattle, AMS called the Pratt market steady to lower, $3 lower in several cases. Two of the lots I noted just for reference was 84 head weighing 780 pounds, came in at $257. Larger lot of 243 head weighing 970, came in at $228. Those would each be flat or just a little softer compared to the week before.
And what about futures contracts?
The June live cattle contract closed Friday at $181.5, down about $2 from last week. But for some context, we are up roughly $10 from where we were, kind of the recent lows in the middle of April. We look over to feeders. August feeder cattle contract was $256 and change, down almost $4 on the week, and again up since those middle April kind of recent lows, $11, $12 on that contract. And
are we continuing to see those lower, slightly flat levels when it comes to box beef?
Depends on which part of box beef. So for Select, yes. Select was basically flat at $302 on Friday compared to the Friday before. And remember, we have a Memorial Day effect kind of in the middle of this. And then Choice was actually up a little bit. So Choice closed Friday at $314, was up from $310. Hopefully that'll be a pull factor, as we go forward through this particular week, because that's the one example of something being up this past week. Everything I've given us so far was flat to a little bit softer. Choice box beef was up a little bit. Hopefully that's an indication of some spillover, maybe grilling buying was stronger than expected. Most of the wholesale buying occurs, multiple weeks before Memorial Day to get ready for foot traffic in grocery stores. But we now know kind of what occurred in the grocery store, and hopefully that is one of the things that's, at play there in the box beef, specifically the higher quality Choice metric.
And wanting to also give a quick update on the CME numbers.
Yeah, so another thing that was in the news this past week is periodically CME examines what are called their price limits, how much the contract can move on any given day. And in the case of live cattle and feeder cattle, those are renewed or re-examined, I should say, annually. And effective June 3rd is both CME's live cattle and feeder cattle contract are going to have higher, so wider daily price limits. The initial limit for live cattle is now going to be $7.50 per hundredweight. That's 75 cents higher than it was before. And feeder cattle is now going to be $9.25, a full dollar more than it was before. I'm not here to take a stand on this as right or wrong. I'm just trying to call awareness to it. I will interject that when you have a commodity that is of more value and or moves more, it makes sense in my eyes to have a different, price limit so the market can kind of move where the market needs to move so the board keeps up with it. But the flip of that is those that have positions, whether you're hedging against buys or sells on live or feeder cattle, sometimes there's margin call implications from this, right? So if the market moves more because of these limits, then you're exposed more. If the market moves more because the actual cash market's moving more, the board can keep up with the cash market better. So it depends how you look at it, if this is good or bad at the like micro individual farm level. But I certainly want to raise awareness and make sure everybody's aware of it.
And Glynn, wanting to also talk about the meat demand monitor and something we talk about usually with you, but can you give us a reminder of what is it?
It's a project that's based here at K-State. It is supported by the Beef and the Pork Checkoff. MDM is the acronym for Meat Demand Monitor, as you say. It's been going since February of 2020, and every month since February of 2020, we survey over 2,000, it's usually closer to 3,000 U.S. residents. It's a very large online survey. About half of those folks are put into a retail grocery store. What would you buy to take home kind of frame decision making, and the other half is put in okay, you're away from home, you're out at the restaurant for a dinner meal, what would you do? We track a plethora of prior day consumption, financial sentiment, what's important to you in buying meat. I'm going to highlight some of those things there. But before I maybe lose some of our listeners in the details, the intent of this project is to be a monitor, just like it says in the name, to track consumption, demand, perception, see how things are changing. And the depth of that data is pretty rich. So we live in a very large country. Meat is a big part of our system. And there's a lot of heterogeneity in that large country. So some people are big beef eaters, some people are big pork eaters, some people are big seafood eaters, all those kind of things. Some people taste is a real important factor. Some people animal welfare is. There's a lot of variation. And this project's designed to hopefully help us understand that.
And one thing for us to touch on today is people's willingness to pay. Some changes in that.
The latest report is for the month of May, and specifically in May compared to April here in 24. Willingness to pay at the retail, so again, grocery store for at-home demand, was higher on 5 of the 8 items we look at, including 2 of the pork. Opposite story when we look at food service demand. So specifically the dinner meal is what we track in this exercise. And actually willingness to pay, which is our measure of meat demand, was down in 7 of the 8 cases. That's a little bit consistent with some financial sentiment and concerns that are ongoing that I'm going to end with here in a minute.
And is there any changes with what's important to people when it comes to purchasing protein?
Short answer is not big changes. And what you're referring to there is on the front page of our base report. Every month we put out a 4-page report, and there's a figure called protein values. So every one of those respondents, every month, we give them a list of 12 things. So taste, freshness, safety, price, nutrition, health, appearance, convenience, hormone or antibiotic free, animal welfare, origin or traceability, and environmental impact. And yes, that's a mouthful. There are 12 items. And we ask them, which are the 4 of those that are most important in your protein purchasing decision? Which of those 4 are the least? And of course, the 4 you don't pick would be an intermediate. So for every respondent, I kind of have these groupings of top 4, middle 4, bottom 4 on there. The chart you and I are looking at, which is what's in the base report, has positive values for several of these. So taste, for example, the chart has a 0.45 positive value. The way you interpret that is there's 45% more of the public that consider taste a top 4 item than a bottom 4. So this is a net zero. These things sum up to 0 because it's a forced choice exercise. Conversely, the thing that's on here that's at the bottom is environmental impact has a negative 0.47 on it. So there's 47% more people in the public consider environmental impact a bottom 4 or least important consideration than there are those that consider it a top. To back off the jargon a little bit, taste, freshness, safety, and price regularly are top determinants for the typical or kind of the middle of the road, U.S. resident. The more production practice, sometimes we call them social issue items, such as environmental impact, origin and traceability, animal welfare, and then use of hormones or antibiotics. They have negative numbers on these charts because it's much more common somebody puts them in the least important than in the top. Now, a point of clarification is there are niche market opportunities behind each one of these. So there are people in the sample, just like there are people in the country, where, for example, animal welfare is the top determining factor. But what I want to impress on folks is that's the minority, not the norm, is what these numbers are saying. So the typical person doesn't consider that a top consideration. The relative order of these is the same. The only thing I would do a call out to is price has moved up and down relatively a little bit since we've launched this project, particularly like say 2021. So before we had elevated inflation and folks had quite a bit of, federal outlay cash in their pocket, some were staying at home and changed their spending patterns. Price was actually falling in importance. And then fast forward to a good chunk of 2023, price was elevated in importance because we're coming out of higher inflation and it had been longer since we had federal aid, federal outlays, that is, stimulus from the pandemic. But overall, the relative order of these protein values is pretty stable.
And Glenn also wanted to think about how much people are regularly consuming when it comes to protein.
We ask a simple multiple-choice question is how do you self-declare your diet? So do you consider yourself a regular consumer of animal products? And that's the bulk of our population. Are you a flexitarian? So you're a meat consumer, but you periodically purposely skip meat in a meal. Are you a vegan? Are you a vegan vegetarian? And then we do a none or other if you choose not to declare. So it's multiple choice, got to choose one of those. The chart you and I are looking at is showing that about 3/4 of the public is regularly telling us they regularly consume animal products. So they're a regular meat eater. An additional 10 to 12% are also flexitarians. So I always highlight for our primarily beef, but also pork listeners in this series is those are also consumers of your products. Just periodically they're not. You sum that up, it's well over 85% of the public that is an ongoing meat consumer. And that has not changed since we launched this project February 2020. If anything, there's a slight uptick in that. So the relative rate of vegan, vegetarian separately, and then when you combine those up, is less than 10% of the public almost every month in this exercise. And it's been declining a little bit in the last year. I highlight that because you won't always pick up on that in the media. There's different presentations of that at times, but we definitely live in a meat-consuming country, and this is just another pulse of that.
And something when we talk about the meat demand monitor, always wanting to mention how household finances are impacting what people are buying.
In May, only 16% indicated their household finances are better than they were in May of 2023. I look forward to that changing, and we're seeing some more optimism when I bring these numbers to you. The rest say either the finances are stable or 37% have said they've been declining, which is not good. The punchline for meat here is consumption of all the major proteins we're tracking. So beef, pork, chicken, and fish, seafood, and we track other minor ones as well. But all of those major protein categories are consumed much more frequently the prior day, so in your breakfast, lunch, or dinner the day before, if you tell me your finances have been improving. And that's not surprising. Meat protein is not the cheapest item in the grocery store. So if you're having household budget constraints, that tends to be something that can be hit, shifts within the meat category and at times out of the category. It's good that we've got the segment that's, finances are improving and they're consuming more. But what we need to see from a macroeconomic perspective is more people in the public saying my finances are improving, and therefore you're going to have a wealth effect and a comfort with your finance effect that would pull additional consumption and demand for these meat products. I look forward to bringing that in future reports.
If someone would like to check out this meat demand monitor, how can they do that?
So go to our AgManager.info website. There's a whole plethora of meat demand information, some of which is grounded around this MDM. There's a page dedicated to it. And if you can't find it, Google me, and I'm happy to send you a link.
That was K-State livestock economist Glynn Tonsor. I will link the meat demand monitor in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show talking about pests in corn production. And then to talk about it, we're joined by K-State Extension entomologist Anthony Zukoff. Anthony, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Anthony, wanting to first talk about corn rootworm, and what is corn rootworm?
So corn rootworm is a major pest of continuous corn production pretty much anywhere corn is grown in the United States, including Kansas. The corn rootworm itself, the adults are small, dark beetles that you could find in cornfields, but the major damaging stage of this pest is the below-ground grubs. So corn rootworm larvae exist below ground and they feed on corn roots and damage them pretty heavily in some cases, and this will stop the plants from taking up nutrients and water very well. It'll cause plants to lodge and just overall really hit yield pretty bad. It's a below-ground pest mainly.
And this pest is something that's been around for quite a while.
Correct. Corn rootworm has been a pest of corn production for decades and decades in the United States. And there's been a lot of research and effort and time that has gone into learning how to control this pest in continuous corn. And it seems like everything we come up with, eventually the corn rootworm, gets ahead of us. So it remains a very challenging pest despite all the decades of research. And the main tool that we have to control this pest right now is Bt corn hybrids. So these Bt corn plants are producing a toxin that is targeting corn rootworm larvae below ground and killing them. So that's been the biggest tool for a long time to help reduce damage from corn rootworm. But unfortunately, in many areas of the country, field-evolved resistance to these Bt hybrids has been detected, and it's creating challenges even using Bt corn hybrids.
I wanted to talk about corn rootworm right now because hatching is taking place.
Yeah, so you can use degree day calculations to estimate the timing of the eggs hatching below ground in cornfields. And so right now, egg hatch is underway pretty much across the entire state. In the southern half of Kansas, hatching is a bit further ahead because there's more degree days accumulated in the soil. And so those eggs are getting close to peak hatch in the southern half of the state. And so using these degree days to estimate when hatching starts and get an idea of peak hatch will allow you to know when to get out in your fields to do some scouting for root damage.
And what scouting are people going to be wanting to do?
So once you get to a peak egg hatch, which is about 680 to 780 degree day accumulations, a week or two after that, get out in your field, dig a bunch of plants and wash the root balls off, and just get an eye for what kind of damage you're seeing in the roots. So if you're using a BT hybrid, that should be controlling and preventing root damage, and you're seeing a lot of corn rootworm feeding damage, that might be an indication that next season you should rotate to a different BT hybrid if you're in a continuous corn production system.
Is this something where there's going to be a lot of them in one place, or could just be a few in your field?
Well, so in continuous corn production, so after multiple years of just planting corn in a row, the populations of rootworms in those continuous fields can become quite high, and it can be very widespread in a field. In problem fields, it'll be widespread, not just localized.
Is this something that producers need to go check on now when they have their degree days, and then maybe go ahead and check them again further down the line?
Yeah, sure. That's a good point. Just check the roots, see what kind of damage you're seeing. And then, later in the season, just see if you see any symptoms of serious root feeding activity. And so that would be, plant death. Lodging is a big issue. The root systems get weak and the plants will fall over. So if they're seeing a lot of lodging or goosenecking, so the base of the plant will kind of curve oddly. So if they're seeing a lot of that later in the season, they probably are still having issues with rootworm control. And so they need to make some management decisions for the next season.
Is there anything besides BT corn hybrids that they can do to hopefully control and manage the corn rootworm?
Yeah, there's another technique folks employ. So late in the season, as the season's coming to an end, you'll start seeing a bunch of adults in the field because those larvae are pupating in the soil. Adults are emerging out of the soil. And so the adults are going to be doing some tassel feeding, maybe some leaf feeding, but the adults are really kind of minor pests. But what they are going to be doing late in the season is laying more eggs in that field. And so if this is a continuous cornfield, you could have a large amount of eggs next season to contribute to larvae feeding in your root systems. And so some people opt to do a late season foliar spray to control adults with the idea of reducing egg laying.
You've mentioned continuous corn quite a few times, and is this a scenario where possibly a crop rotation could be beneficial?
Yes, crop rotation is the best way to control corn rootworm. So rotating out of corn to something else like soybean or anything really, when those eggs hatch that next season, the larvae are going to die because they're only feeding on corn roots. They can only develop on corn root systems. So by rotating, you're effectively eliminating that population that season. And then after that, if you rotate back to corn, you should not have any problems. So it's important to remember that corn rootworms are a pest of continuous corn systems, and systems where you're rotating out of corn. Corn rootworm is not a problem.
Anthony, also wanting to mention corn earworm, which other Kansas corn growers might be dealing with. And so what is corn earworm?
Yeah, so since we were discussing the BT resistance challenges for corn rootworm, I'd like to take a moment just to highlight that there are also developing BT resistance issues with corn earworm. So there are BT hybrids that control corn earworm, just like there are BT hybrids that control corn rootworm. And so corn earworm is a moth. It's a kind of a boring tan moth as an adult. And the pest stage for corn earworm is going to be the caterpillar. So the adult moths are flying around fields as silking starts, and they're laying eggs on those silks, and those eggs are going to hatch, and the caterpillars will go into those ears and start feeding on developing corn kernels. And so they're, destroying corn kernels directly, so that's going to, hit yield. But then also as they're feeding, they're opening up those developing ears to fungal infections, which will further cause yield losses. And one of the biggest tools we've had to combat corn earworm, just like corn rootworm, is BT corn hybrids, and they've worked very well for a long time. But there are now evidence to show that resistance to BT corn is present in corn earworms. We have seen some evidence of that in Kansas as well, so it's something that producers should be aware of. So if you're using a BT hybrid that is supposed to be controlling earworm, I encourage you to get out in the field around early milk developmental stage with those ears. Look at 30 to 50 ears, just pull those tips of the husk back and see if you see live caterpillars. So if it's a Bt plant that's supposed to control corn earworm and you're seeing live active caterpillars that are a half inch or more, you might want to rotate your hybrid next season.
And is there, once again, a different control besides just Bt corn?
Yes, historically, before Bt corn, for corn earworm, folks could do aerial or foliar applications when tassel starts, but it was very challenging to time that spray correctly because the adults emerge over a very prolonged amount of time, and they're laying eggs over a very long amount of time. So often it would require multiple field sprays to reduce corn earworm damage. So not very economical.
And is this another pest where crop rotation is a possibility, or will that bug just follow you around?
Well, this particular pest, since it has so many other hosts in the landscape, it could be a pest of even rotated cornfields. It just depends on the population that year in the landscape.
Anthony, if people would like to find out more information about these pests, what's your recommendation for them being able to do that?
I would say go online and check out the Entomology Department's webpage. That's where we house all of our insect pest management guides, which will detail all these pests in great detail and also list management options for each crop. So if you access the corn insect pest management guide, you'll see all of this information in there plus more.
Anthony, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and share with us some information about corn rootworm and corn earworm.
Anytime. Thank you.
That was Kansas State University Extension entomologist Anthony Zukoff as he shared information on corn earworm and corn rootworm. If you're interested in finding out more information about these pests, there are a few different ways you can do so, and I will link them all in today's show notes on agtoday.net. The first one is a resource that Anthony mentioned, and that's going to the K-State's Entomology Department website. You can get to it by going to Entomology.ksu.edu. Again, that is Entomology.ksu.edu. The next one is checking out the Crop Insects in Kansas book from K-State Research and Extension's bookstore. You can find it by going to bookstore.ksre.ksu.edu. Again, that is bookstore.ksre.ksu.edu. You can also check out an article from the recent Agronomy e-update on May 24th titled Corn Rootworm Egg Hatch Has Begun in Kansas. Also in the Agronomy e-update, you can see the updated schedule for the Kansas wheat plot tours. The next one is taking place June 5th, starting at 7:30 a.m. in Republic County. Following that at 10 a.m., they'll continue to be in Republic County. And then after that at 3, they'll be in Clay County, and rounding out the day in Washington County at 5 p.m. I will put the link to this if you'd like to check out the schedule and find the exact locations. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have more for you ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Monday show with another segment of Faces in Agriculture. And this week we're joined by someone involved in agriculture from Ellis County, Laura Haffner. Laura, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Laura, can you tell us a little bit about your involvement in agriculture?
I wear quite a few hats in agriculture. We have a farm out in Sheridan and Gove County where we raise grain on a dry land operation out there. Also, High Plains harvesting is a major focus of my husband, Ryan, and I. We travel from Texas to the Canadian border each summer, harvesting wheat and other small grains before returning to Kansas, where we complete the fall harvest run. I also do some adjuncting in the agriculture department at Fort Hays and serve on the Kansas Farm Bureau Board of Directors and the Women's Leadership Committee.
Laura, sounds like you're involved in a lot of different things. And so what have been some of those challenges that you've seen with your involvement in agriculture?
One of the biggest challenges that we face in the harvesting industry right now is around labor. There's not enough domestic members of the workforce to help feed our seasonal labor needs. There's unemployment rates in rural America, and we're all competing for the same workforce. As a result, we utilize programs like the H-2A visa program, which allows legal workers to come and complete seasonal jobs. This is very important for us in the harvest industry to be able to utilize these programs, but because of increased government regulations, this is becoming increasingly difficult to regulate. many of our employees have worked for us for several years, and they truly become like members of our family. And we absolutely could not do the job that we do, which is to put food on Americans' plates as well as those around the world, if we didn't have our valuable teammates working right along beside us.
Laura, what have you been doing then to support having your teammates and your workers come back and being able to help you year after year?
I think this goes along with the theme of telling your story. I've been to D.C. Twice this spring. One was for an advocacy work with Kansas Farm Bureau, and one was with the American Farm Bureau Fly-In, truly to really be able to tell our stories about what this situation looks like out here in rural America, and really advocate for the need to have a viable workforce program, whether that's here domestically or specifically around the H-2A program, and how do we utilize those programs and how important our teammates are to us.
For people who are wanting to get involved in agriculture off their farm and be supportive of the industry, what are your recommendations for how they could do that?
I think one way that you can do that is by telling your story, and especially commodity groups or farm organization like Kansas Farm Bureau, Kansas Corn, some of those different organizations really helps give a unified voice. Obviously, our individual voices are extremely important when we're trying to tell our stories and relay what's happening on our farms and ranches. But when we can come together in a unified way and a unified front, I think a lot of things become, it allows us to be able to promote our stories and to really be able to share what's going on out here in rural America. And together we're stronger. So that would be one of the first places that I would encourage people to stop and do, and also just getting involved in local organizations that help strengthen your local communities, whatever they might be in your local towns.
What makes you excited for the future of agriculture?
One of the coolest things about my involvement in agriculture is the educational component. I've really enjoyed teaching the next generation over the last several years. I think every generation sometimes gets knocked for whatever it is that they see or they're doing. My generation certainly did. But I can tell you the future is bright in agriculture. We have some great young people coming up. They're highly motivated. They want to do good things, extremely intelligent and experienced. And I'm just delighted to see what the amazing things that they're going to do for us and each other as they mature and move forward.
If people would like to stay up to date with what you're doing around agriculture, Laura, is there a way they can do that?
They can. We have social media pages. High Plains Harvesting is on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And I also do some personal blogging under the Flyover Sky on Instagram and Facebook as well. I also blog for the High Plains Journal each summer for their program called All Aboard Wheat Harvest, which follows my crew and several other crews as we travel across the country.
Laura, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and share with us your involvement in agriculture.
Thank you.
That was Laura Haffner from Ellis County. In today's show notes on agtoday.net, I will put links if you'd like to stay up to date with what Laura's doing. That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.